Hi, I'm Mitch Gallagher. Welcome to Sweetwater's Guitars and Gear. We are on location in Los Angeles. We are at Center Staging, where Roland Boss have opened up their A&R office, and we've come together with Billy Duffy from the Cult. Thank you for being here. Appreciate you taking time to come down. It's a pleasure to see you. So much great music through the years. All the stuff you've done with the Cult and projects are going on there and things, and we have a lot of gear stuff to talk about and some pedals and things. But let's take a step back. You're from Manchester originally.
Yeah, Manchester, England. That's where I grew up.
All right. How'd you get started playing guitar?
It was kind of like just the normal high school band obsession. Happened to just sit next to a guy first day in class, and we both had music magazines, like newspapers that were a big deal in the 70s, and kind of just randomly, it was just a kind of a random thing where we were put together in class, became friends, and he'd already had drum lessons, and he said, I'm into music, and da-da-da, and do you want, I know a bass player that lives in the same street, do you want to be in a band? And I kind of was like, oh, I guess you need a guitar player then. Right. So that was how it happened. It really was just like circumstance.
Right. But you're already playing.
Not really. No. Actually, I wasn't playing at all. No, I just. So then I had to go back. No, I had to go back to ask my father. So I want to get a guitar. So my dad bought me my first guitar, and
nice.
I forget when this was. I generally think that it was more in the mid-70s. I tend to get everything a bit mixed up time-wise, but I think it was like 74.
Right. What
75.
kind of music were you into at the time?
Very much into rock. You know, I went through some stuff I found in the old days, and you know, like in your high school, you're writing your books and all that. So apparently, from what I wrote down, I was into Mott the Hoople, Queen, early Queen, nothing, Status Quo. What else was I into? The Who, Free, Bad Company, Free. That was it. I'd seen Slade supported by Thin Lizzy when they were a trio, the Whiskey in the Jar era, before they kind of blew up. Right. And I liked Slade. I was in the Slade fan club, which I'm still quite proud of. Nice. I went to see them play. So that was kind of it. You know, it was. I wasn't really old enough to have got into more sophisticated stuff like Zeppelin and Black Sabbath and Pink Floyd, and I just gravitated guitar music that was fairly immediate, that kind of, you know, that was always my thing. Right.
So who were the Nosebleeds?
The Nosebleeds were the local sort of punk band who, in my neighbourhood in South Manchester, is a place called Wythenshawe, which is a big, I guess you'd call it a housing project in the United States. It was owned by the city, and everybody that lived there rented off the city. You didn't own where you lived, you rented it from the city for as long as you lived. Right. So basically we all, there was a whole thousands and thousands of sort of people from central Manchester got relocated in the 50s and early 60s to this beautiful garden suburb called Wythenshawe. And in Wythenshawe, there was a lot of bands, and it was a lot of, I guess Manchester has a lot of Irish, you know, type people, you know, Irish descent. And there was just a few bands, and Nosebleeds was one of the bands. They were originally called Wild Ram, because it was an interesting period that in the UK where, you know, 1976 and 77 was kind of a watershed in terms of when punk rock happened. Right. And it had such a big impact in the UK that it really sort of basically drew a line in the sand between the types of people who embraced it and the people who said, no, it's a fad, it's never going to be anywhere, I'm going to still have long hair and wear flares and listen to Pink Floyd. And there was kind of a dividing line in the sand. And the Nosebleeds originally were called Wild Ram, and they were kind of a rock band, and they were in my neighbourhood, and I just aspired to be, I was hoping to be their guitar roadie. Right. And because I was playing a little bit in a high school band and that type of thing, and rehearsing in my friend's garage. In fact, it wasn't a garage, he didn't even have a garage, it was like a little shed thing on the side of the house. Anyway, long story short, punk happened. I got into punk, so did the guys in Wild Ram. They changed their name to Ed Banger and the Nosebleeds, released a single, one single, and that they were part of the punk rock scene, a quite peripheral part of it.
Right, right. You played with them.
Yeah, briefly. Well, yeah. Well, actually, what actually happened was they split up, and the lead singer went off, and the guitar player went off to do something because he was kind of a bit of a hippie, and the punk thing didn't suit him. So he went into this avant-garde thing and became quite famous in England for doing music under the name the Durruti Column on Factory Records from Manchester. His name was Vinnie Riley, and he was quite a progressive. He was in a Steve Hillage.
Sure.
So anyway, whatever. But so to cut a long story short, he left and the singer left, and the rhythm section who knew me asked me if I could play, and they gave me the task of if I could play the intro to the one single, which was called I Ain't Been to No Music School.
Right.
And if anybody can dig it up, you can find it. There's a weird like harmonic thing going on. It wasn't just like straightforward. The song's kind of a straightforward punk rock song,
right?
But there's actually some tricky guitar stuff. So I took about a week to figure that out, got the gig, and they said, oh, you're great. Now we need a singer. Do you know anybody? And I just said that I know this guy I've been going to concerts with. His name's Stephen. He's not very punk. He's a little bit eccentric. He's into like the New York Dolls, Patti Smith, a lot of an American underground, you know, the Stooges, that kind of stuff.
Right.
And they said, oh, well, we'll give him a shot as a singer. And, you know, he turned out to be Stephen Patrick Morrissey.
Right.
Who has had a reasonable career of his own.
Absolutely, right.
So we wrote some songs together and did 2 gigs. And
Nice.
that was the whole Nosebleeds story in a nutshell. It was
Right.
a year period in Manchester, just post-punk.
Right, right. That's
And
awesome.
it was a lot of fun. It was a great time to be in England, because England was kind of, it wasn't a great place to be in the mid-70s, and I think that's why punk, that was the breeding ground for punk.
Okay.
And it just happened to be, I'm of the generation, when we left high school, punk was, you know, a national big deal.
Right, right.
That was the Nosebleeds.
Yeah, right, right. It's a great story.
2 shows only, though. No, I think there was 1 cassette of one of the gigs.
Yeah.
And I don't know where even that is. I certainly never had it. But
Right, that would be fun to dig that up.
that'd be weird. Yeah.
So you mentioned Patti Smith. There is a story that there is a connection between a Patti Smith gig and you and Johnny Marr and Morrissey and the Smiths.
That's true. And I was reminded, because Johnny Marr, who's remained a good friend of mine, and I knew him from back in that era, he reminded me that I introduced him to Morrissey at a Ramones gig.
Right.
Or a Patti Smith gig. Nobody can quite remember whether it was a Ramones gig or a Patti Smith gig. But I definitely introduced them. But it was a very quick, hi, how you doing?
Right.
They got together later and were reintroduced. But that was their initial time, I think, when they clapped eyes on each other.
Right, a moment in history.
Yeah, I think it was at the Manchester Apollo.
Right, right. So tell us about the founding of the cult. How did that come about?
The cult basically, that was, that era we were referring to was like 78, 79, and then I moved to London and was just kind of hustling, I'd got in another band in Manchester who offered me a job in London with a record deal, so I kind of had to leave the Nosebleeds in pursuit of what I thought were better circumstances, i.e. a record deal, somewhere to stay, and a move to the capital.
Right.
So I kind of went for that, had to leave Manchester behind, and then I kind of struggled for about a year or 2, just doing job, you know, the usual thing that musicians do, and formed my character. And then I ended up getting a gig in a band called Theatre of Hate, who were a tremendous band, and I thoroughly recommend anybody checking out their stuff if you like kind of post-punk alternative music. And I joined Theatre of Hate, spent a year on the road with them, and in that year there was a support band on one of the tours in 1982, and they were called the Southern Death Cult.
Right.
They were the opening band, they were the hot new band coming up in England. They were put on tour with Theatre of Hate as like special guests, and it was like a whole big deal. And I just became friends with them, and they were from the north of England like me, so we kind of gravitated on that basis. And I became friends with all of the band, and especially the singer Ian Asprey, who was from kind of near to me in the northwest of England originally, and we just sort of stayed in touch. I ended up getting fired / leaving Theatre of Hate for being a little bit too opinionated, which was very true. I was, because it wasn't my band. I was the guitar player. It was another guy's band, really great band, and I kind of was unemployed for a little bit, was just hustling, and Southern Death Cult were kind of continuing and doing well. And then one day, I got a message from Ian's brother, who was sent to look for me, that Ian had decided he didn't want to play with Southern Death Cult anymore, and liked the way I played and looked, and kind of on a lot of levels wanted to know if I was interested in doing anything with him musically, you know. So, having been particularly impressed with his vocals, it took me about a second to go, yeah,
right.
You know, I can stop working in a clothes shop.
Right.
And and we got together and wrote some songs, and that was like 1983, and that was the basic how the band formed, and then the name. It was just literally me and Ian, and we started looking for a bass player and a drummer, and we'd written these songs together, and Ian kind of came to stay with me in my apartment in London. And we were like, what can we call the band? And we ended up just calling it the Death Cult,
right?
Based upon the Southern Death Cult. But it's two different bands. And I guess Ian felt that he had a proprietary ownership of the name because he thought it up. So he was like, well, I thought of the Southern Death Cult, that's my name, I'm going to take that, we can use it, but we don't want to call it that. So I said, well, let's call it the Death Cult. And we started as the Death Cult, we did about 9 months. As that, and then we kind of felt that the Gothic thing was a little bit of it was a hindrance. Like the whole name, Death, and all that was a little bit kind of. We felt we were going to get a little pigeonholed, and as the music developed and we started working and getting a writing relationship, we kind of started figuring that the music might expand out to be a little more rock, a bit more mainstream, not so indie.
Right.
And we thought that Death in the name might be a little. Of a hindrance. So we just decided to just call it the Cult, and that was in January 1984.
And obviously it worked. Worked out.
Yeah.
So 9 albums, 10 albums since then?
I think so. I'm not counting. We've not been super prolific, really. You know, there's been a lot of bands probably have done more. I kind of lost count, but it's somewhere near that, yeah.
Right. So one of the Watershed albums, of course, is Electric.
Yeah.
And you worked with Rick Rubin. On that record. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience and how you kind of worked with him and how that went? Yeah,
well, Rick, what had happened was the album prior to that was called Love, and that was in Europe and Canada, like a breakthrough record for us. We had a couple of hits on it, and it'd taken the band to a whole different level. So having toured that album, and the song a lot of people know, She Saw Sanctuary, was on that album.
Right.
And it was kind of like dance rock. It was a little bit lighter. The album's a little bit psychedelic. There's a lot of wah-wah, and we tried to kind of, it was just a blend of stuff that I still really enjoy. But we kind of went back to make the follow-up album, and I think a bunch of different things. We weren't really prepared. We were young men who just had some success and a lot of touring, and we weren't ready to record, but people wanted us to. So we ploughed ahead regardless, made the record, and realised it was kind of a bit overblown, and it had some moments, and it exists. We ended up releasing it as it's been out there in a limited form, but there was a decision made that we wanted to kind of simplify the album. It wasn't quite what we wanted, and Rick was brought in. He was a guy we'd met in New York and started hanging out with when we were going to New York a lot. As we started visiting the States and the UK, we'd always embark from New York. And Rick was a guy who was brought in to basically originally do one song. This is with the genius of Rick Rubin. And he said, well, I'll remix your whole album if you allow me to record one song from the floor with you guys, you know, from the ground up. So everybody went, great. So we all show up to New York, and the idea is we remix, cut one song. And what Rick did was he said to us, so what don't you like about the album? We said, well, it's a little overblown, the songs are a bit long, it's a bit indulgent, it's a bit too thick. We were kind of Because what happened was we basically hadn't finished writing the songs, and we were just layering parts and guitar harmonies and all this stuff without the song substance being finished. So it was a bit, we finished it and mixed it, and it was kind of at its moments, but it wasn't what, you know?
Right.
Our instinct was not right, that it wasn't right. So Rick came in and he said, well, what song do you hate the most? And we picked a particular song, which I think might have been the song Peace Dog. And that one really didn't sound anything like we imagined it, you know, because me and Ian write the stuff, and
right.
So anyway, we cut that one first, and he said we liked it so much, and it was such a revolutionary approach that we did the whole album in 19 days. We just recut everything from the floor,
right.
24 track, old school, 2 guitar tracks. I mean, everything was very primal, and it was a very much that was the first time Rick Rubin had produced a band with a drum kit. I mean, he'd made records with like the Beastie Boys and stuff, but it was all samples, and
right.
you know, it was the early days of that kind of stuff. So it was his first attempts, and he was always very smart at using really good engineers, and we had Andy Wallace, who's still a legendary figure in that world of mixing. And he engineered it and recorded it, and basically Rick's quote, which sums it all of what I've just set up really eloquently and succinctly, is I didn't really produce the Cult in so much as I reduced them. And that's really, in essence,
right. Get it down to the
essentials of rock, let a lot more space, and it was really necessary for us at that point. I don't think we could write electric as it was. You know, people often say, well, why don't you write another electric? Well, first of all, I'm not 24 anymore doing what I did when I was 24.
Sure.
So there's not going to be any authenticity in trying to pretending you're some sort. And that's one of the things I think is wrong with rock music. There's a lot of people pretending and writing songs about a lifestyle that they're not living.
Right.
And I think in order for rock to be vital and the essence of all those rock bands that were great, they were living it.
Right.
And some were dying it. And that was the authenticity of it. And one of the things we've tried to do with the Cult always, and particularly because of Ian, really, he kind of very much like he wears his heart on his sleeve as a guy, is to make the music. I don't think anybody can accuse us of being fake. It's real, and what it is what it is, and that's what we're feeling, and that's what we earnestly believe at that moment. So that's kind of, you know, a process you go through to get to the truth. Your truth as an artist.
Right.
And that's why I suppose me and Ian get along, is that we fundamentally, whilst we have our differences on the surface, as any two people would have, deep down we have some sort of unspoken beliefs about authenticity of music and the real artists, as opposed to, you know, all the other stuff that goes on the top, all the icing on the cake.
Right, so again, the essentials are,
you know,
where it comes back.
Take care of the real, you know.
All right. So what's the writing process like for the two of you?
It's funny. It's an interesting one, because we've always been very much like a 50-50 partnership. There aren't any Ian songs or Billy songs. They're just Asprey, Duffy. We get together since day one, since we sat in my apartment in London, Brixton, London, and wrote a few songs. The principle remains the same. You know, there's a creative tension, and, you know, there's times it's difficult, and times, you know, that tension is a good thing, and sometimes I think it's a hindrance, but I think overall, you know, it's a bit like a 3-legged race.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's our writing process, but I think ultimately there's a lot of stability, and I think for the most part we've gotten, you know, quite good results from it. You
Absolutely,
know?
yeah.
But we don't. It's not like I have a complete. So I mean, I don't write lyrics, and nobody would really want to hear my lyrics anyway. Even if I did write them, even I wouldn't want to hear them. But, you know, and you know, I think we complement each other very well, and I think that like Ian says, his quote was, you know, me and him, we're kind of the head and the heart of the Cult. You know, you need both to make a whole thing, and we function well as that team, and I'm just very grateful that, you know, I found a guy, and you know, that partner, and that thing where it just works. My guitar, his voice, it just kind of works.
Right. Speaking of your guitar and things working, some of us here were talking a little bit earlier about your tone, particularly your rhythm tone.
Okay.
And Malcolm Young came up.
Right.
Is that someone that you're have an affinity for that kind of a rhythm sound?
Yeah, I like, yeah, very much so. Very much like Malcolm Young. I like Steve Jones and the Pistols. I thought I had a really good right hand.
Right.
It's all about the right hand.
Yeah.
A lot of people, I think, spend a lot of time worrying about flourishes and all that kind of stuff, and you know, they don't really dig in. Again, it's about commitment and belief to what you do and authenticity, and I think that, you know, I don't think anybody can really doubt AC/DC's.
Right, their conviction. That's
Yeah, you know what I mean? So, you know, nobody's faking it over there. I think that, yeah, I always was fascinated by Gretches as guitars, visually, you know, I always thought them as some kind of mythical beast, and it was great to see. About the time, actually, we were talking about the 70s in the UK and when punk happened, you know, I saw AC/DC play with Bon Scott in 77, and they just started blowing up, but nobody really knew what they were, because they were kind of like at this schoolboy figure, and everything was a little bit fluid, and there was this new musical scene, and nobody knew, you know, there was the guys with long hair and flares singing about dragons, and, you know, that was kind of not happening. So everybody was like angry and had short hair and was kind of making a lot of noise and getting drunk and having fun. But what were AC/DC? Because they didn't really have long hair, but they didn't have short hair. They were definitely not phony. They were very plain. It was kind of a thing. And so I went to see him and I loved him. You know, and I always loved it. And he had a white falcon, I think, you know, and he just laid it down, you know, so.
Right.
I've tried to do both. That has been my quest, is to try and combine part. If Malcolm played Angus's parts,
Right.
that's what I've been trying to do.
That's the goal,
with
right.
some limited success, but yeah, they're great.
Right.
You know.
So you mentioned the White Falcon and the Gretsch, and obviously that's an unusual choice for hard rock and for high volume situations.
Yes,
those kind of things.
yes, correct.
Yeah.
It's a challenge.
How did you end up with that guitar?
It was based originally visually, I think in essence, the fans of punk rock, which I include myself and Ian Astbury and 20 million other people around the world, once punk had happened, basically by 79 it was dead, as far as we were concerned. The original bands had all kind of settled into what they were going to be or split up. The whole vibe had gone. The Pistols broke up in 78, and it was kind of like you were getting these second generation kind of like stick a safety pin through your lip, and like it was all kind of fake, and it didn't feel good and it didn't feel authentic. So for me, the quest was finding my own voice and my own as a musician, a guitar player, instead of, you know, wanting to have a guitar like somebody in the Sex Pistols, or wanting to be Johnny Thunders, or, you know, in the Stooges, or, you know, I wanted to like get my own thing. And I was familiar with the White Falcon from Neil Young, because pre-punk, my high school band, we were into Crosby, Stills and Nash and Young and all that, as well as a bunch of other rock stuff that we talked about. And so I was familiar with the guitar, and when I joined Theatre of Hate, that band, ironically, the lead singer played a Gretsch. And he had a Les Paul, and he still had a black Les Paul Custom, but he got this Gretsch, a single anniversary with green thing with the pickup next to the neck.
Right.
And he got a fabulous sound out of it, but he couldn't sing and play. So that's why I got hired, to play all the parts. And he said, well, if you get the gig in the band, what guitar would you get? Because at the time I had a Les Paul Jr. Single, double cutaway, cherry, you know, 58, whatever. I'd saved and slaved, and I couldn't afford a yellow one like Johnny Thunders, but I got a cherry one, and it was a real Gibson, and I was all excited. And I said, well, I think I'd probably get one of those Gretches. And he kind of laughed, because, you know, at that point I didn't know. I was thinking about getting a Gretsch, and I got a White Falcon.
Right.
I think the Stray Cats might have had something to do with it as well, if I'm honest. I'd seen them play in Brian with the 6120, and they were amazing. I mean, they're still a great band now, but you can imagine what they were like after punk, because they had all the punk energy, but a total different look and a freshness to them. So there was a few things. It was image, and then it was I was searching for a sound, and you know, people say to me, well, why a Gretsch between a Gretsch and a Les Paul, or whatever? And I said, well, if you think of a Gretsch as an SUV, you wouldn't drive it around a racetrack, would you? But you wouldn't drive a sports car off road. They do different things, and that's why And originally, the other final thing was I could only afford one guitar, so.
Made your choice.
That was the one, yeah. And
Right.
it just became synonymous with the band. We used it a lot, and that was that, really.
Right. So how did you deal with the challenge of the volume and feedback with the hollow body?
Well, a couple of things. I've always used 2 amps with it, one of which is the
JC120?
over there, which was one thing, and I might have talked about that another time, but yeah, that was one part of the sound, but I always had a valve amp as well, and I kind of had the 2 of them together and kind of just blended the sounds. And the valve amp, I would have it nice and chimey, like warm, but not, basically try to go for Malcolm Young.
Right.
And then I would use distortion from the front end. And that's how I could play with that. I'd use echo. If you're running the amp so hot, you can't really, there's nowhere to go, and it'll just uncontrollably feed back. So
right.
That was one of the reasons. It might have been more luck than good judgment on my part that's what happened. But to get the sound I was feeling, and I was the only guitar player, so I wanted it to sound big and have lots of hanging resonant notes. And solos weren't a big deal then. That came a little later, but in '83, it really wasn't good form or good taste to be doing solos. To be honest, it wasn't what was going on in England. You could do melodic parts and you could do riffs, but actual lead blues-based solos were not happening, not cool.
Right.
So, you won't find many from guitar bands, new wave bands, really.
Right.
So that wasn't such a big deal, for me. So I was looking for sound, and that's how I did it. I kind of used the pedals more to give me a variety of tones and different horsepowers,
Right.
And because you stuff the guitar a bit too.
Right, block the inside.
Yeah, a little bit, to with whatever you can get your hands on. I've used all sorts of stuff.
Right. Did you modify the guitars in any way? Did you have different pickups? Or
Yes, yeah. I found that back in England, the 70s Gretches that I ended up using were very, the pickups were very underpowered. And I liked everything about the guitar. I liked everything about the way they played and the way they felt. They stayed in tune. They weren't super silly expensive. They were reasonably available in the UK. However, the pickups were terrible. They had no power. So as soon as I got my, that was the biggest problem really. And I struggled with that right up until I got Seymour Duncan to make me a pickup. I got introduced to him when I first came to the States, and he made me a pickup, which has ended up, a version of it has ended up and migrated into my signature guitar. He made me a pickup because I basically said to him, I kind of want something that's like has the chunk of like a Les Paul at the bottom end, so you feel like you're getting a percussive punch, but you still get that high chimey Gretsch, that signature Gretsch thing, and that's kind of where I think that's what he tried to get. I think he achieved that pretty well. Right,
absolutely. So you mentioned the JC120, and again, the jazz chorus is a little different choice for that that style. Were you using the chorus in the amp, or were you using chorus from pedal?
I've never used chorus on a pedal. Ever.
So it's always
the only chorus I ever did was, for my recollection, was off the amp. That was the signature. That was the signature feature with those, and just there's no other amp that makes that. And I've tried. They did the pedal. I tried the heads. And for me, I like it in the tuba 12 with an open back. That, to me, is the primary way. But, over the years, there were many different attempts, even by Roland, to make different versions. And I have the 77 at home, a little cute,
one.
pocket rocket. And and they even made a 160, which had 4 10s in it, which I'm sure is a very rare beast. I remember using that once. But I always had the most success with that because I'd use the closed back cabinet with the valve amp, which is probably a Marshall because they were the most easily available amps in the UK at the time. So I'd always use a Marshall. No, I one time I had an Ampeg, and just trying to be, when you're a kid, you try and be different.
Yeah.
So I found an Ampeg because nobody had an Ampeg. I think I might have seen David Johansen's band, and they used Ampeg guitar combos. I think they were called VT22s.
Right, right.
And you know, when you're a kid, you just get very influenced by what you see.
Of course.
And so I think there was a little bit of that going on with it. And if you look at a lot of footage of the bands in the late 70s in the UK, you know, the Clash, the Pistols, nobody was really, the stacks were not happening.
Right.
At the best, you'd put a combo on top of a 4x12. If you look around, even, you know, bands, and that was my experience, you know, Theatre of Hate, we opened for the Clash, went on tour, and they were the big headliners, and we had our little, I put my Fender Twin on top of a flight case with my Gretsch and an overdrive and a delay, and that was me, and then the Clash, like, oh, they've got 4x12s, and their combos. So a little light went off, so when the Cult got together,
right.
then I thought, oh, so put that, and anyway, that's how that kind of stuff happens.
Right.
You know, when
Yeah,
you're
absolutely.
20 years old.
Right. Then you have the serendipity of the jazz chorus is also a great platform for pedals.
Yeah,
And you
yeah.
mentioned using that to shape
Yeah.
your tone. Can you tell us a little bit about how that's kind of evolved for you, using the pedals to drive the front end of things?
Well, I mean, things kind of went full circle. As the band spent more time in America, we did the Electric album and got a little harder edged, and I put the Gretches away for a couple of years. I didn't play them for a couple of tours because I just couldn't really, the band had kind of gone more of a hard rock direction.
Right.
So I sort of put them in storage from I think like late 80s to early 90s. And I was mostly using Les Pauls, which originally was my first guitar anyway. It was a Les Paul copy, and I'd had a Les Paul custom, and you know, that was my go-to. Mick Ronson, you know,
Sure.
Les Paul customs were my guitar before the Gretsch. So with the pedals, basically, I always originally when the Cult got together, I didn't actually have any pedals. I had one overdrive pedal because I had a Les Paul. I remember one period I had a Les Paul, one overdrive, and a combo. And when the bass player joined the band, a guy called Jamie Stewart, who was in the band for like 10 years, he originally was a guitar player. So when he got the gig, and he was in the handshake, and we'd done all that, he said, well, I guess I won't be needing these anymore. And he handed me a Boss overdrive, the SD, whatever, you know, and some MXR pedal and something else. And I kind of like, that's how I started adding stuff, and the delay pedal kind of came into the picture, and I just added, and then I had enough of them to put in a pedal board.
Right.
So I ended up with one of those Boss pedal boards, the little grey plastic thingies, and
Sure. Yeah.
because you also have to remember that, you know, you're all in the back of a van, you know, around Europe, and even when we came to the States, even with the Cult in '84, everything got flown, so I was carrying everything. You know, if you imagine the Gretsch in a case, carrying it, sitting with your legs on a plane before it all became like security conscious.
Right.
You know, and everything didn't have to go in the overhead bin. And, you know, when flying was fun, I used to carry that on. And, you know, so minimalism is kind of what I'm getting at. And then, of course, eventually, as you get bigger and bigger, everything gets bigger. You have to have you see all the bands, and that guy's got a switchable rack-mounted system. I better get me one of those.
Right.
And it just happens. And I went through that period, and that was all fantastic when the band was in the sort of status where we could afford that kind of degree of staffing and luxury and all the good, you know, that good period. And, you know, it's come full circle where I've gone back to sort of simplicity, and the rig I use now, I mean, I could have still used a rack-mounted thing, but I actually like the honesty of the pedals again. And I don't use that many that I need, you know, I'm not into science fiction, so I don't need it to be too crazy, you know?
Right. So you've been associated with and used many Boss pedals over the years. What drew you to those, aside from being handed them by the bass player?
Initially just being handed one, it was like gift horse in the mouth time.
Right.
And then reliability, availability, and their consistency, and they literally are bomb-proof.
Right.
I mean, you know, I don't recall ever one breaking, and I'm very heavy on my stuff. You know, I always wear like a heavy boot on stage. I can't go to work in like casual footwear. So when I go on stage, it's like I stomp on there and I feel like I'm you know, making it real, you
Right,
know. I don't want to
right.
be like, you know, skipping around a pair of plimsolls, you know, so. So I stand on them and they take a beating, you know.
Right, right. We were talking earlier, just before we were shooting the video, about the new Wazza pedals.
Yeah.
You've had a chance to give those a try, right?
Yes, I have. I have Wazza'd. I
Yeah.
was one of the chosen people to go in and pre-Wazza, and they're great.
Yeah, yeah.
They have basically, sum it up, they have a switch, and it makes a good pedal better.
Right,
They've got a switch, you should say better,
right.
but it's better.
Yeah, so they've got the vintage setting and then the custom
Yeah,
setting.
yeah.
that
I mean,
just
it gives you everything that the pedal's been known for, but then it's just so much more enhanced.
Right.
So I'm very excited to get my hands on a couple of those.
And drop those into the rig?
Yeah, absolutely, you know, yeah. I still use old Boss delays. I don't really like rack-mounted stuff. I like, you know, I use like 3 Boss delays now in different settings, and I'm not a guy that's going to be kneeling down in the middle of a show changing my settings, and you know, first of all, I can't barely see. Second of all, I can't be bothered. I need it like on, off, and each one has to do and the combinations have to work. You know, and the pedals have never caused me any trouble. You know, the Boss pedals are very, very reliable. You know, they don't give you any issues. And the joke, I think I've done this probably before in a video, was how the intro to She Sells Sanctuary, which is kind of a particular identifiable picked part, was done because I was joking around in a studio and I had, at that time, probably 6 Boss pedals, and I was trying to emulate Jimmy Page in Song Remains the Same when he does the thing with the violin bow, because I found a violin bow on the floor, and everybody was a little bored, and I just, oh, check this out. When I was in the studio where Zeppelin recorded in London, a studio called Olympic, where a lot of the great bands recorded, and we did Sanctuary there on purpose because we were trying to channel some of that goodness even then.
Right.
And in the digital age where everybody was sampling, we were like, oh, we want to go where Zeppelin did the first 2 albums. Tell us more stories. What did Jimmy Page use? And they were like, well, he used a Telecaster and a AC30.
Right.
Said the engineer who claimed to be there. So I was like, oh, okay. Anyway, so I'm not joking around, and I just was doing that with my delays and the violin bow, which was on the floor, because it was an orchestral studio. It was a big wooden room, and they used to project movies. And an orchestra would score, you know, in there. It was old school, you know.
Yeah.
And it was, and then, so basically, just to enhance the joke, I turned every pedal on, started doing the violin thing, and it was making this wacky noise, and then I don't know how it went from there, but from that point to picking the intro to She Sells Sanctuary with all those pedals on, and that's how it happened.
Right. That's awesome.
It was kind of like sort of organic, you know.
Right. So the unfortunate misfortune of some violin player losing his bow.
Yeah,
results in a
yeah,
hit.
that was it. Yeah. Because it was the middle section of the song. The song didn't have an intro. It just started with a snare hit and a kind of a riff, and. That was it. I mean, the JC120 was a big part of that sound. It was, you know, out of the 2 amps, I really had to have the JC120 because that gave that spread.
Right.
The chorus gives a real spread, and I would always get the, you know, it panned in the PA, so it would make this guitar sound huge. And if you think of the era, you've got like The Edge, Will Sargent from a band called Echo and the Bunnymen. There was a guitar player called John McGeoch. Doing stuff, played Susie and the Banshees and a bunch of people, Public Image. And we were all trying to, you know, do all that. Johnny Marr was coming along, you know, he was just starting up with Morrissey and the Smiths. And, you know, a lot of Echo was involved. And to me, I found my particular version of it, my little thing, as a combination of the Gretsch, the JC120, but I need a little more chunk from somewhere, and I, you know, needed a valve amp with it. But I would not have sounded the same if I hadn't used the Roland, and which is why I still use one today.
Right. It works.
Yeah, it works. So don't, you know, if it ain't broke,
don't fix it.
And it, you know.
There you go. So there's a rumor that there is going to be a giveaway with Sweetwater and Roland and Gretsch. What's the story there?
Well, I believe all the mandarins and wizards back there run everything in the empire are going to do some sort of competition where they get one of my signature guitars, and all you do, which, you know, are not cheap. I've got to be honest. I'm kind of, you know, It's not a cheap item, a Gretsch.
Right.
You've just got to get. I'm not exactly sure the details of it. You've just basically got to get the kind of. If you buy the Boss pack of, like, you know, Billy Duffy Love pedals from the Sanctuary Sound, if you get that pack, I think it enters you to get in the draw for that.
Okay.
Something along those lines, you know.
Right. It's a set
That's
of-
my disclaimer. You have to read the small print.
Right.
There's some small print now. It goes like
Right.
this. Legal department.
Right. Well, we're still future casting.
Yeah,
That'll
yeah,
be
yeah.
sometime. I think coming up, they'll have all the details
Yeah.
for that and how you enter and how you can win. But it's a combination of is it 6 pedals or 3 pedals?
We've still got to get the actual details of it, because at the time there's one debatable thing we've got to figure out. Whereas, because back in the day I didn't use a Boss pedal for one element of the sound, so but I think I have used one since, so that was the only difference. Because I want it to be as authentic as it can be.
basically
That's my key word today, authentic.
Authentic, yeah, well,
Never going to use the word authentic again. I'm putting it to bed now.
That's awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming in. The giveaway is going to be a lot of fun.
It's really cool. I'm very proud of my guitar. I was very happy. I've never done a signature guitar before, and I was very...
Yeah, we're going here. Sitting
there
right
she is.
Yeah.
And they really...
Can I pick it up?
Yeah.
Check that out.
Yeah.
You want to show that off a little bit?
Oh, yeah, look at that. Isn't it lovely?
That is beautiful.
It's not a bad guitar, really.
The White
at
Falcon.
all. It works pretty good.
Yeah.
So I was happy with it. It did a great job. The guitars are great. I use them live all the time. I don't have to. I choose to.
Right.
I've got other Gretches, and these ones sound killer. And to be honest, I mean, they sound better than the original guitar that I recorded Sanctuary on. These sound better.
Right.
I mean, I literally had a sound guy say, I know that's your, like, original, but the
Right.
other ones... And I'm cool with that,
Right.
That one's retired. It's a nice old folks' home for
Right.
nice Gretches.
Sure.
He hangs out with Neil Young's old Gretsch. And there's an old Gretsch guitar reunion.
There you
Steve
go.
Stills is. And
There you go.
the guy from Bow Wow Wow. Yeah, so there it is. It's a lovely guitar.
Yeah. Well, now we know the secret. You need this guitar, some Boss pedals, and
And some socks to put inside, or a T-shirt, or your girlfriend's makeup
whatever you
pads,
can
whatever,
get it fit in
Cornwall balls, it all works. Because the only feedback you get that's bad is a really bottom end, like a G note, and it's like some kind of weird
resonance kind of
something's.
thing.
Yeah. It's kind of. I mean, it's not a horrible sound, but it's kind of like unusable.
You just got to have it in the key of the song.
Yes. Yeah. So write everything in G. You're
Get it back
laughing.
There we go.
So there she is.
That's awesome.
All right.
Billy, thank you so
Dave.
much. Appreciate you being here.
Cool.
And I'd also like to give special thanks to Roland and Boss for opening up their A&R office to us. We had Chad, we have Mark, we have Gary, we have Bob. They've been helping us out here, and we're very appreciative of that. And I appreciate you joining me for Sweetwater's Guitars and Gear. I'm Mitch Gallagher.